Baby finds German Shepherd with broken toy. What happened next will break your heart. A little girl. A silent scream. A moment that shattered the silence of an entire town. What she did next left doctors stunned and strangers in tears. This is more than a rescue. It's a lesson in bravery, love, and what it truly means to be human. Like, share, and tell us where you're watching from, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. The park was nearly empty that afternoon, wrapped in a soft gray sky that made everything seem quieter than it really was. A cool wind rolled lazily through the trees, shaking loose a few late autumn leaves that spiraled down onto the cracked pavement. From a distance, the sandbox looked deserted, just a rectangle of damp sand, its edges darkened by the morning rain. And then Emily saw her. The German Shepherd was sitting so still she might have been carved from stone, her fur mottled with dust and the uneven wear of too many seasons. Her eyes were deep, almost hollow, fixed on some point just beyond anyone's understanding. In her mouth, she carried a plastic toy truck, bright colors once, now muted under years of fading. One wheel was missing, and a thin strip of clear tape held part of the cap together, but the way she held it, it was as though it was the most important thing she had left in the world. The wind shifted, and Emily caught the faint scent of damp earth mixed with something else, an old, sun-warmed plastic smell, like the attic of a house you haven't entered in years. She might have walked on if not for the sudden sound of tiny feet crunching on the gravel path. Sophie had wandered ahead again. The toddler's curls bobbed as she clutched her green sippy cup in one hand, her bare feet smudged with dirt from slipping off her sandals earlier. Emily opened her mouth to call her back, but Sophie didn't seem to hear. Her eyes were locked on the shepherd, wide and curious, like she'd spotted a character from one of her picture books stepping into real life. The dog didn't move. Not when Sophie crossed the grass. Not when the distance closed to only a few steps. The only sound was the faint, almost imperceptible squeak of the toy's remaining wheel shifting in the dog's grip. Emily's breath caught. The shepherd tilted her head slightly, as though taking in this tiny, determined figure making her way across the sandbox border. Sophie stopped just in front of her, the cup dangling from her hand. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Just the quiet hum of a lawnmower in the distance and the whisper of wind through the bare branches. Emily's fingers tightened around the stroller handle. If you saw this moment, would you walk away or try to understand what it meant? She took a slow step forward, her eyes drawn again to that battered toy truck. It wasn't just old, it had been cared for. The tape was neat, deliberate. The faded paint worn in a way that spoke of countless small hands pushing it over countless rough surfaces. And the shepherd's jaw was gentle around it, not a hint of pressure that might damage it further. A chill ran down Emily's spine. There was a story here. She could feel it as certain as the damp grass beneath her feet. And something told her the toy wasn't just a toy. It was a key, a fragment of a life the rest of the town had forgotten, and this dog had been carrying it all along. Emily had chosen the park that afternoon for its quiet. It was one of those small neighborhood spaces where the benches leaned slightly from age and the swings squeaked on every arc, but the air felt soft, and the shade of the maple trees made it a perfect place to let Sophie wander. She sat on the worn wooden bench near the sandbox, sipping lukewarm coffee from a travel mug, her eyes half on her phone and half on her daughter, who was happily scooping damp sand into a plastic bucket. The clouds had rolled in not long after they arrived, muting the light until everything seemed washed in a pale silver. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead, scattering a few brittle ones onto the sandbox. That was when Emily saw movement at the far corner. At first, she thought it was just another dog from the nearby houses, maybe wandering ahead of its owner. But as the figure emerged from behind the line of shrubs, Emily realized this was no casual stroll. The German Shepherd moved with a slow, deliberate gait, her fur uneven and weathered, her posture neither aggressive nor relaxed, just focused. And in her mouth was that battered plastic toy truck. Emily found herself sitting up straighter, drawn to the strange sight. The truck was clearly old. The once bright paint on its cab had faded to dull red and yellow, and a single wheel was missing. A strip of clear tape wound tightly around the body, holding a crack together. The craftsmanship of the repair was almost tender, the kind of fix you make for something you can't bear to throw away. Sophie spotted the dog almost instantly. The little girl froze mid-scoop, eyes wide, sand spilling from her plastic shovel. She set it down and began toddling toward the shepherd without a word, each step small but determined. Emily's instinct was to call her back, but something about the shepherd's stillness stopped her. The dog stood at the edge of the sandbox, her gaze locked, not on Sophie, but on the toy in her mouth, as if guarding it was her only task in the world. Sophie came to a halt just in front of her, tilting her head like children do when they're curious. The dog lowered her head ever so slightly, the toy still clamped gently between her jaws. Sophie reached out a chubby hand and brushed her fingers over the plastic surface. The faint squeak of the loose wheel broke the silence. For a heartbeat, Emily's breath caught. But the shepherd didn't pull away. She didn't even shift her weight. Instead, her tail gave the smallest wag, one slow, deliberate sweep from side to side, like a sign she'd decided this tiny stranger could be trusted. Emily exhaled, stepping closer, though careful not to intrude. From here, she could see the wear on the dog's coat, the faint dust clinging to her legs, the tired lines around her eyes. Those eyes, though, there was something in them. Not fear, not aggression. Sadness, yes, but also a deep, unshakable focus. It was as if every moment of her day, every step she took, revolved around keeping that toy safe. Sophie patted the truck once more before crouching down to examine it from a lower angle, babbling softly in her toddler's language. The dog simply stood there, watching, her gaze occasionally flicking between the child and the object in her mouth, as though ensuring both were unharmed. Emily knew dogs could be protective of their toys, but this wasn't possession in the usual sense. This was different. The shepherd wasn't guarding it from Sophie, she was sharing it with her, offering the connection without letting it go. The way a person might hold on to a photograph while letting someone else see it. It hit Emily unexpectedly hard, that idea of holding on while still offering. She felt it in her chest, an ache she couldn't explain. She crouched beside her daughter, meeting the shepherd's gaze directly. "You've taken care of this for a long time, haven't you?" she murmured. The dog blinked slowly, almost like she'd understood. The breeze stirred again, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and rain. Somewhere nearby, a swing creaked in the wind, and a lone bird called from a distant branch. Sophie giggled and touched the truck one more time before plopping down in the sand, content. The dog stayed where she was, toy still in place, eyes steady. And Emily, for reasons she couldn't yet name, had the distinct feeling that this meeting wasn't random at all. This wasn't just a dog in a park. This was the beginning of something. Emily eased down onto one knee, careful not to startle the dog. Sophie was still perched in the sand, humming her toddler tune, tapping at the plastic truck's chipped hood. Emily's eyes were drawn to a faint, uneven set of letters carved into the underside, so light she almost missed them beneath the dirt smudges. She brushed a thumb over the grooves. The carving wasn't the neat work of a factory. It was small and human, the kind of mark made with a pocket knife or nail by a child proud to label what was his. She didn't have time to think much on it before Sophie let out a squeal of delight and stumbled back toward their bench, arms swinging like little windmills. Emily rose and followed, expecting the dog to stay put. But the shepherd moved too, steady, deliberate, trotting alongside Sophie with the toy still clutched gently in her mouth. She didn't brush against the toddler or crowd her. She just stayed close, as if keeping formation. When they reached the bench, Emily lifted Sophie into her lap. The dog stopped just short of her knees, still watching the little girl with those steady amber eyes. For a moment, the three of them sat in a small bubble of quiet, broken only by the occasional squeak of the truck's broken wheel shifting. That bubble popped when a shadow stretched across the grass. Emily glanced up to see an older man in a faded ball cap making his way down the path with a grocery sack in one arm. He slowed when his eyes landed on the dog. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, his voice tinged with both surprise and familiarity. "You know her?" Emily asked. He nodded, adjusting his cap. "Not personally, but I've seen her. Been a fixture round here for a while now. Always got that same old truck in her mouth. Never seen her without it. Some folks say she belongs to someone over on Miller Street, but I've never seen anyone with her." Emily glanced back at the dog, who had lowered herself to her haunches beside the bench, still silent. The initials on the truck echoed in her mind. It was nothing solid yet, just the faint outline of something that might mean more. The man's gaze softened. "She doesn't take food from people, you know. Not from me, not from anyone else I've asked. Like she's on some kind of mission." Emily reached into Sophie's snack bag and pulled out a small piece of bread, holding it out tentatively. The shepherd's nose twitched. She looked at the offering, then back at Sophie, and turned her head away. Refusal, not out of distrust, but almost as if it wasn't for her. It was odd how certain Emily felt about that. The dog wasn't rejecting kindness. She was choosing not to take it. Whatever her purpose was, it seemed to leave no room for distraction. The old man shifted the grocery sack in his arms. "You ever hear about the little boy who—" He stopped himself mid-sentence, like he'd wandered too close to something private. "Never mind. Just keep your eye on her. She's been around longer than most folks think." With a polite nod, he moved on down the path, his steps swallowed by the rustle of the wind in the leaves. Emily looked down at Sophie, who was now holding her sippy cup upside down, fascinated by the slow drip of water onto her shoes. The dog's gaze flicked from the baby's face to the toy, then to Emily, and back again, as if making some internal inventory. It wasn't lost on Emily how the shepherd's body angled ever so slightly toward Sophie. The position was protective, deliberate, like a guard who knew her post. She studied the initials again, whispering them under her breath. J. The letters tasted unfamiliar, but there was something about them that felt heavier than just a child's doodle. And the man's almost story, cut short, left her with the prickle of curiosity that wouldn't let go. The clouds thickened above, and the light in the park shifted to a softer gray. Sophie leaned forward in her lap, stretching a hand toward the dog again. This time, the shepherd stepped closer, lowering the truck so Sophie could rest her fingers against the taped crack in its side. The faint squeak came again, that odd, almost tender sound in the middle of an otherwise quiet afternoon. Emily didn't know it yet, but those carved initials would turn out to be the first thread in a story the town had stopped telling. A story the dog had been carrying, quite literally, for months. The next afternoon the sky hung low and pewter, a lid over the park that made every sound feel nearer. Emily told herself she was coming back for Sophie's sake, that the toddler had fallen in love with the sandbox and that gentle, solemn dog, but the truth was riding under her skin like static. She needed to see if the shepherd would be there, if those carved initials had been a trick of light, if yesterday had been one of those small-town oddities that dissolve by morning. She pushed the stroller across the gravel path, the wheels bumping rhythmically over loose stones, and scanned the swings, the benches, the crooked little maple that leaned toward the sandbox like it had secrets to tell. The shepherd was already there. She sat in the same spot beside the sandbox as if she hadn't moved all night, the cracked truck held lightly in her mouth, the tape along it seemed stained darker where wet sand had kissed it. When Emily drew closer, the dog stood, not startled, just purposeful, and flicked her gaze from Sophie to Emily, and back again, like a roll call. Sophie clapped, delighted, and immediately thrust her arms toward the dog, doing that open and shut grab that meant mine. Emily lifted the toddler out of the stroller and set her down on the edge of the sand. The shepherd stepped forward and lowered the truck just enough for Sophie to pat the scuffed cab with chubby fingers. The faint squeak sounded again. The dog's tail made a small half-moon. Then she picked up the toy and looked toward the path, away from the playground, toward the far end where the park thinned into a line of utility poles and a chain-link fence that wore vines like a shawl. "Are you leaving?" Emily asked softly, feeling foolish the second the words left her mouth. But the shepherd took 2 steps toward the path, then turned her head over her shoulder. The look wasn't a question so much as an invitation. Emily felt it in her ribs. Sophie wobbled to standing and pointed, as if she, too, understood. "Doggy." Emily hesitated only long enough to tuck the stroller strap around her wrist. "Okay," she breathed. "But we stay on the sidewalk. And we don't go where I can't see." The toddler didn't care about rules. She bounced on her toes and giggled. The shepherd started down the path at an easy, steady pace, carrying the toy with that careful, delicate grip like a courier guarding a fragile thing. They left the ordered lines of the park and traded them for the soft disorder of back streets. The air changed, no longer trimmed by cut grass and fresh mulch, but rounded with the damp smell of last night's rain still caught in the cracks of old asphalt. A wind chime clicked lazily somewhere behind a fence. Laundry hung damp and heavy on a line, shirts and a towel sagging like tired flags. The shepherd kept to the edges, moving along the seam where sidewalk met fence, her paws making almost no sound. Twice she stopped to shift the toy and never once let it touch the ground. They cut behind a row of garages, paint flaked into curled chips around rusted hinges, past an aluminum canoe turned upside down and gone dull with oxidation, stepped over a chalk drawing half-washed into pastel veins, stars, a lopsided house, a smiling stick figure with hair like a crown. Sophie babbled to her sippy cup, then to the dog's back, then to the breeze. Emily listened to the soft pat-pat of small sneakers, the whisper of newspaper tumbling along the curb, the hum of a distant lawn mower sawing the afternoon in neat green rows. The shepherd slipped through a gap in a chain-link fence where the bottom had curled back from its anchors, leaving a mouth just wide enough for a dog or a determined child. Emily's heart knocked hard once. "We go around," she said firmly, steering the stroller to the corner where the fence ended and a narrow alley opened up. The dog reappeared at the other side, waiting, then moving on when they matched her. They passed an abandoned schoolyard that must have once been bright, a low brick building with boarded windows, a mural on the side faded to ghosts of primary colors, hands, doves, a rainbow that had given up halfway across the wall. The playground equipment stood like a skeleton of play, sun-bleached and squeaking whenever the wind pushed it. Weeds had made a kingdom of the mulch. A torn banner clung to the fence, its letters only half legible now, "Together we," and then nothing. The shepherd never paused. She glanced once and kept moving as if the place made her hurry. At the end of the block, a narrow footbridge arched over a drainage ditch that dressed itself up as a creek every time the sky wept. Today it was just a trickle, whispering under the boards. The wood gave a low groan when Emily pushed the stroller across, each wheel thunking over the seams. The air over the water was cooler, carrying the mineral tang of mud and something green growing down where light rarely reached. Sophie leaned out, craning to see her reflection slide like an oil painting under the slats, and the shepherd paused halfway across, the truck's broken wheel glinting once when the sun slipped between clouds. Beyond the bridge, the houses thinned until they were more suggestion than presence. Mailboxes leaning like old men, stepped porches missing a step, a basketball hoop with no net. The road bled into gravel and then into hard-packed dirt with grass stitching it back together in patches. A wooded lot loomed ahead, the kind of place teens cut through and parents warned little kids about in winter, when branches stood naked and honest. Now it was dense, late spring lush, all leaves and shade and the sound of hidden life. A jay reporting something from high up, the quick skitter of a squirrel second-guessing itself, the occasional low murmur of a car on the main road far enough away to be a rumor. Emily's stomach tightened without asking her permission. "We don't go deep," she told no one in particular. "We're just seeing." The shepherd broke the tree line with the confidence of someone who knew this path by heart and followed a trail Emily never would have named as one, just a suggestion of compacted earth and the memory of footsteps. It wound them through a lattice of trunks, past a patch of ferns gathered like green hands cupped to catch light, along a fallen log slick with moss. Gnats hovered in a shaft of sun like dust in a cathedral. Emily's breath grew louder to her own ears, and she could hear Sophie's low, contented hum, as if the child were soothing her. And then, almost too suddenly to be graceful, the woods opened into a small clearing eaten from the edge of the lot. The ground here was a boneyard of last season's leaves, crisp at the edges and damp in the middle, smelling of richness and rot. Against the far side of the clearing crouched a shed so tired it looked like a sigh made of wood. Its roof had lost shingles in ragged bites. The door hung a little off-plumb. One of the small windows had a crack like a spider web trapped under the glass. A padlock, rusted but present, dangled from a hasp that had pulled partway free of the frame, the screws a little proud, as if someone had meant to fix it and got called away mid-task. The shepherd slowed, ears angled forward, body arranging itself into something businesslike. She crossed the last few yards, every step placed as if the ground mattered, and when she reached the stoop, a concrete slab with the corner broken off and a tuft of opportunistic grass growing from the wound, she lifted the truck as delicately as if it were a glass ornament and set it down right against the threshold. Then she looked back. The look wasn't invitation now. It was confirmation. "We're here." Emily swallowed. The air felt different this close to the shed, cooler in a way that didn't come from shade, older somehow, like breath held. A line of ants was busy with some mission along the foundation. The wind shivered the canopy and a scatter of light pattered the door. She put the stroller brake on and scooped Sophie into her arms, the toddler's weight familiar and anchoring. Sophie's head turned toward the shed as if a string were tied between them. "Doggy," she whispered and pointed. "I see," Emily whispered back. She had to make a choice in her body, not just her mind. She felt it as a step forward that wasn't just a step. "Hello," she called, aiming her voice at the cracks around the doorframe. It came out too loud in the quiet, bounced off wood and leaf and back into her ears. She tried again, softer. "Is anyone there?" "Hello." Silence held for a long, thin moment. Somewhere a woodpecker tested a trunk, tap, 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 and a car shifted gears on the road that was not here. Emily could feel her pulse in the fingers that circled Sophie's back. She took one more cautious step, enough for her to see the narrow slice of dark at the door's edge where age had widened a seam. The shepherd's tail had gone still. Her ears were forward, alive. "Okay," Emily said to the dog, to the baby, to the shed, to her own fear. "I'm going to." From inside the shed came a sound so small it could have been a trick of the wind, a thin, breathy thread of noise. Not the complaint of wood settling, not an animal's skitter, a human sound, high and tremulous, as if caught in a throat and used to asking. A whimper. Then, as if encouraged by the attempt to be heard, a second one, longer, more certain, the beginning shape of a cry. Sophie stiffened in her arms. "Baby," she said, not as a question, but as recognition. She leaned toward the door, her small fingers opening and closing as if to catch the sound and pull it closer. The shepherd didn't bark. She didn't scratch. She pressed her nose to the bottom edge of the door and exhaled in a soft, steady stream, a sound that said, "I'm here," better than a shout ever could. Then she turned her head just enough to find Emily's eyes again, and in that bare sliver of a glance she seemed to say the thing Emily's heart had already understood. The toy wasn't a toy, not really. It was a message, and it had led them to someone who needed more than a story. Emily's hand hovered at the rusty padlock, her heart pounding in her ears. The cries from inside had quieted, leaving behind an uneasy silence, the kind that makes you feel watched. She glanced down at Sophie, who clung to her shirt, eyes fixed on the weathered door. The shepherd sat close by, her gaze steady and unblinking, body still but coiled with a quiet urgency. The lock was old, rust bloomed across its surface, and when Emily pressed at it with her thumb, the hasp gave more than she expected. It wasn't truly secure. Someone had only ever meant for it to look that way. With a push, the hasp pulled away from the frame, and the door creaked open, groaning like it resented the intrusion. The air inside was cooler, carrying the faint, damp smell of wood that had been shut away from sunlight for too long. Dust floated lazily in a beam of light coming from the cracked window, illuminating a small space that didn't look like any storage shed Emily had seen. In the corner, on a patch of swept floor, lay a blanket, faded blue, edges frayed and curling from years of washing. Beside it, a thin pillow, its stuffing matted, the case decorated with faded cartoon animals. A plastic cup with a missing handle sat nearby, tipped on its side, a dried ring of milk staining the rim. Against the wall, a pile of baby clothes, tiny shirts, socks, a sweater with a loose button, were folded unevenly, as if by small hands doing their best. Emily stepped inside cautiously, her voice soft. "Hello? Is anyone here?" The only answer was the sound of the wind outside, stirring the branches. It didn't feel abandoned. Not completely. There was a sense of recentness, as though whoever had been here might return at any moment. The blanket had the faint rumpled look of recent use. The cup wasn't dusty. The smell, though muted, held the warmth of human life, not the stale odor of long neglect. Behind her, claws clicked against the wooden floor. The shepherd padded into the shed, the toy truck still in her mouth. She walked directly to the blanket, lowered herself into a curl beside it, and placed the toy just in front of her paws. Then she lowered her head onto the folded forelegs and exhaled slowly, her eyes half closed. It wasn't random. Emily could see it now. The way the dog had led them here, the way she settled into that spot like she'd done it 100 times before. This was her post, her vigil. She was guarding something, or someone, who wasn't here right now. Emily crouched, studying the shepherd's face. "You've been keeping watch," she murmured. "Haven't you?" The dog's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but she didn't move, her gaze fixed on the doorway as if she might miss something if she looked away. The absence in the room pressed heavier with each passing second. A child had been here recently, that much was clear. But where were they now? And why was the dog here alone? Emily pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen. She knew calling the authorities meant stepping into something complicated, but she also knew she couldn't just walk away. Her stomach knotted as she dialed, speaking quietly when the dispatcher answered. She explained what she'd found: a makeshift sleeping spot, baby items, a dog that seemed to be guarding it, and the dispatcher's voice grew alert, asking for the location. Emily gave it, her words low and careful. "They'll send someone right away," the dispatcher said. "Stay put if you can." She hung up and looked around for somewhere to sit. The floor was bare and cold, so she chose the edge of the stoop just outside, keeping the door propped open. Sophie settled on her lap, more interested in the leaves skittering across the clearing than the weight of the moment. The shepherd didn't join them. She stayed inside, her chin still on her paws, her eyes never leaving that open doorway. The toy truck sat like a badge in front of her. Emily took Sophie's sippy cup from the stroller and unscrewed the lid. She knelt again and slid the cup toward the dog. "You must be thirsty," she said softly. The shepherd hesitated, glancing once at Sophie before shifting forward. She lapped from the cup slowly, pausing often to look toward the clearing, her ears flicking at each distant sound. A bird call, the groan of a tree in the wind, the faint hum of an approaching car. Emily couldn't shake the image in her mind. The dog curled around a sleeping child, the toy always near. This wasn't just loyalty, it was duty. Something about the precision of it, the way the shepherd had clearly been maintaining this space, sent a shiver through her. Minutes stretched. Sophie wriggled to the ground and began stacking pebbles into little piles. Emily kept one arm around her, scanning the tree line for signs of movement. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a branch snapped under something's weight, and the shepherd's head came up instantly. Her gaze cut to the doorway, sharp and expectant, and her tail gave a single, hopeful thump against the floorboards. But no one came. Emily swallowed hard. She could feel the dog's longing, this constant state of readiness, the way every muscle seemed tuned for a reunion that never happened. Whoever had been here was gone for now, but the shepherd's eyes told her she believed they'd return. When the sound of tires crunching on gravel finally reached them, Emily exhaled in relief. Two uniformed officers stepped out of a white SUV, their expressions shifting from caution to concern as they approached. Emily stood, explaining quickly, her voice low so Sophie wouldn't catch the tension in it. The officers moved into the shed, their boots muffled on the old wood. They examined the blanket, the clothes, the cup, making small notes. One of them crouched near the dog, who didn't move, didn't growl, just stayed at her post, watching the door. "She's been here a while," one officer said quietly to the other. "You can see where she's lain. Same spot over and over." Emily nodded. "She led me here," she said. "From the park. She wanted me to see this." The shepherd shifted only to place a paw lightly on the edge of the blanket, as though to remind everyone it wasn't to be disturbed too much. Her gaze never left the doorway, not even when the officers stepped back outside to make calls on their radios. Emily realized then that whatever was happening here, this wasn't the end of the story, it was only the doorway into it. And the shepherd, she wasn't leaving that doorway until the person she was waiting for stepped through it again. Word spread the way it always does in small towns, not in a straight line, but like ripples from a stone tossed into a still pond. By the time the afternoon leaned toward evening, the shed had been photographed and measured, the blanket folded into an evidence bag, and the officers had knocked on enough doors that names began to surface. The shepherd stayed where she always did, near the threshold, toy tucked between her paws, while Emily sat with Sophie on the stoop and tried to stitch together the pieces as they floated past. A retired mail carrier named Mrs. Wilcox arrived first, coaxed by curiosity and concern. She peered into the shed, squinted at the blue blanket, and then covered her mouth with a trembling hand. "I know that dog," she whispered, backing away so she wouldn't crowd the doorway. "Used to see her on Linden every morning. She'd trot beside a little boy with a backpack that was almost bigger than he was. She carried that very toy sometimes. If he forgot it, she'd nudge it into his hands with her nose." "What was his name?" Emily asked gently. "Liam," Mrs. Wilcox said, almost to herself. "Liam Carter. And his daddy, Evan. He was quiet, always polite. He'd take the late shift at the mill and walk Liam to school in the morning before sleeping a few hours. I used to leave a note on his mailbox when his light didn't go on, just to check." A younger couple from 2 streets over added another shard. "We heard the ambulance that night," the woman said softly, fingers twisting together. "Spring storm, road slick. Not an accident. He had a blood clot, they said." He was home alone when it happened. The boy stayed with the neighbor until social services came. Relatives? Emily asked, feeling the air thicken. Distant, the man answered. Ohio, maybe. Cousin of a cousin. They came within days, packed fast. The dog, she slipped out the back door when they were loading the car. We tried to catch her, but she bolted. He glanced toward the shepherd, who'd lifted her head at the sound of their voices. She came back here. We'd see her in the mornings, cutting along the fence line, passing the schoolyard, stopping at the corner where they waited for the bus. The officers returned with a thin file and an apology on their faces, the kind of apology that says we're doing what we can, but time has already moved the people you're looking for. The records confirmed the fragments. Evan Carter, 34. A single father since Liam's mom had left when the boy was barely toddling. Liam, 5.5. The Ohio relatives had supplied a forwarding address, but no phone number. We'll reach out through the state, one officer promised. It may take a few days. The shepherd shifted then, as if the word days had pricked her. She rose and crossed to the toy, took it back in her mouth, and settled again with it clamped soft between her teeth. Emily felt a tightness in her chest, a ribbon pulling from the past into the present. The initials she'd found carved into the underside of the plastic, weren't just marks now. They were a signature, a boy's effort to claim something that could be lost. That night, long after the last patrol car rolled away and the shed stood under a silvered moon, Emily sat at her kitchen table while Sophie slept upstairs and the shepherd dozed in a curl by the back door. She opened her notebook, the one she used for grocery lists and feed schedules and little vignettes she never showed anyone, and wrote the facts she knew. Then, because facts were not enough, she let memory rise. Not her memory, she didn't possess that, but the town's memory, the scraps of images she'd gathered from faces and voices and the way people looked at the dog. In that woven memory, the mornings were always blue and early. A kettle on a stove. A father folding a sandwich into wax paper, tucking it into a lunch pail with a bruised apple and a note that said "Be brave. I love you." A little boy's socks never quite matched, his cowlick determined to point north no matter how much water smoothed it. The shepherd, then newer in her coat, her ears sharper, her legs springy, spun small circles at the doorway, tail thumping against the wall, the toy truck clenched in her mouth the way some dogs held a leash, like a ritual to begin the day. "Ready?" Evan would ask, voice rough with sleep and effort, an apron string of fatigue tied around his words. He'd shrug into a jacket, kneel to check the zipper on Liam's backpack, thumb the last of a tear from the corner of his son's eye because the boy cried when he was excited as often as when he was sad. The shepherd would nudge them both until they laughed. Then they'd step into the morning. On Linden, the sunrise came slanting between maples, and the sidewalks buckled in the way old sidewalks do, tendered by roots and time. The shepherd padded with purpose at Liam's side, one eye always on his shoes, one ear always pointed back for the sound of his small voice. When he stuttered, the dog matched her steps to his slower ones. When he forgot his toy, she dropped hers in his hands, as if trading the weight of her comfort for the weight of his fear. On cold days, Evan tucked the toy into the pocket of Liam's coat, just the nose of it peeking out so the boy could touch it at the crosswalk when the world felt too big. The toy itself had a history the way objects in loving homes do. It was bright once, fire engine red, wheels that spun so true you could send it across a kitchen floor with one flick and it would kiss the baseboard and sit there smug. The first crack appeared when Liam dropped it from the porch railing during a game that made sense only to 5-year-old logic. Evan had sat at the table that night with a strip of clear tape and the steady patience of a man repairing more than plastic. He smoothed the tape along the seam and blew on it, as if his breath could make it hold forever. "There?" he'd said. "Better than new." Liam believed him. The shepherd believed whatever Liam believed. On the days Evan worked late, Mrs. Wilcox watched Liam after school. She said the dog could tell time better than any clock she owned. At exactly 3:15, the shepherd would rise from the kitchen rug and stand by the door, ears forward, tail an anxious metronome. When the school bus sighed at the corner, she'd be at the gate before the brakes finished squealing. Liam would land against her like joy, toy truck banging against his knee, mouth a string of stories about recess and a worm he'd named Henry and a paint stain on his shirt that looked like a dragon if you squinted. The shepherd catalogued it all with her nose: school, grass, glue, dragon paint, Henry worm, and decided each day they had survived the world again. When Evan died, the neighborhood felt the absence in the air. It had a quality like a room where someone had just stood. The shepherd lay on the front mat and refused, for a time, to move. She pressed her chin to the shoe Evan always left just inside the door, a shoe with a damp spot where rain had dried in a half-moon. Liam slept at Mrs. Wilcox's, small body folded like a question mark on a couch that smelled like lavender. The shepherd split her time between the two places, pacing, listening, placing her head in the spaces where Evan's hands had been. The relatives came in a car packed with caution and conclusion. They were not unkind. They were simply not here. Their faces were mapped by grief of their own and the logistics that grief demands: paperwork and phone calls and the sorting of life into boxes. Someone stacked Liam's clothes into a duffel. Someone emptied the bathroom sink of a razor, a toothbrush with the bristles splayed, a bar of soap that had dried in a shape like a lost continent. Someone looked at the dog and said, "We'll figure out what to do with her." The shepherd stood between the couch and the door, toy in her mouth, tail low but sturdy, as if she could be the bridge between was and will be. When they loaded the car, the shepherd danced in tight circles, reading the scent of unfamiliar roads and a future she didn't understand. Liam clutched the toy to his chest and cried into the dog's neck. A cousin knelt and whispered, "Come on, girl," patting the seat. The shepherd placed two paws on the threshold and then hopped back down. When the cousin reached for her collar, blue, cracked, with a tag shaped like a bone, the buckle slipped. The shepherd took one step backward, then another, as if the ground itself was moving. Someone shouted, a door thunked shut, the engine coughed awake. Liam pressed his face to the window and slapped his palm against the glass. The dog ran after the car for one impossible, frantic block, the toy in her mouth banging against her teeth. At the corner, the car turned. The shepherd stopped. She stood there trembling, the way a body shakes when its purpose is bigger than its strength, and then she turned and trotted home. Home was not a house anymore. Home became a route. Linden Street, where the morning light still knew her name. The schoolyard fence, where she waited without understanding weekends. The crossing where Liam had learned to look both ways. The park bench where Evan had once fallen asleep sitting upright, hands tucked in his pockets, head tipped back, the dog's chin resting on his knee. The shed with the blanket, the place some gentle hand had made soft when there was no softness left. It wasn't much, but it was order. And dogs build their lives around order when everything else has unraveled. People tried to help, in the piecemeal way people do. A teenager left a bowl of water. A mother set out a handful of kibble and whispered, "Good girl," not wanting to spook her. The shepherd accepted only what matched the ritual of her days. She'd carry the toy to the edge of the sidewalk and lay it down, eat 2 mouthfuls, then pick the toy up again and continue, because leaving it for even the minutes required to chew felt like tempting fate. If she found the shed door shut, she'd nose it until the hasp loosened and the hinge sighed and the dust motes rose like tiny ghosts in the dim. When Emily pictured it all, as if she'd been there, as if she could hear the cadence of Evan's steps, the sweet nonsense of Liam's voice, she understood why the dog had looked at that doorway the way she did. It was a threshold to a story that still wanted finishing. The toy wasn't plastic anymore. It was a thread. The initials on the underside weren't just letters. They were a handprint left in wet cement. Every time the wheel squeaked, it said Liam. The next morning, a caseworker phoned with news that felt like a door opening slowly. The Ohio relatives had been reached. Liam was safe, living with a great-aunt named Nora who had a porch with peeling paint and a garden of marigolds. He missed his father. He missed his dog. He asked for her at night. There was talk. Only talk, the caseworker warned, because logistics love to stand in the way of reunions, of bringing him for a visit. "We'll see what we can do," the caseworker said, and Emily heard the careful hope in the voice, the professional armor slipping for a moment. That afternoon, Mrs. Wilcox brought a shoebox worn soft at the corners. Inside lay photographs she'd kept without quite knowing why. Neighbors do that, become the quiet archivists of other people's lives. The first showed Evan in a paper crown at a birthday party, frosting on his knuckle, eyes crinkled. The second, Emily caught her breath, was Liam at the park, palm on the shepherd's head, the toy truck parked on her paws like a tiny red sentinel. They were both looking at something off camera, and whatever it was had made them focus with the same intensity, the same lean into wonder. There was one more image, edges scissored into a scallop by the kind of craft scissors that live in kitchen drawers. It was not framed, not posed. The shepherd lay on a blanket. A little boy lay with his ribs against her ribs, listening to her breathe like it was ocean. Evan's feet were in the bottom of the frame, crossed at the ankles. You could see the corner of a note taped to the fridge, just enough to read the first two words. Milk, bread. The rest had been cut away. Emily held that picture for a long time. She thought about the broken toy truck in the dog's mouth, about the initials carved with a careful pride, about how objects inherit the warmth of hands. She thought about the shed, and the blanket, and the way the shepherd still lifted her head at every sound like a mother claiming each noise as a possibility. She thought about how grief, in the end, is just love with nowhere to go. When dusk gathered, Emily took Sophie's small hand and walked to the back door. The shepherd rose from her place without being called, toy already in her mouth as if reading the route written on Emily's heart. They crossed the yard and the alley and the field that sloped toward the stand of trees. The shed leaned in the same patient way it always had. Inside, Emily laid the scalloped photograph on the floor where the blanket had been. The shepherd approached and lowered her nose to the paper, her breath fogging its glossy surface. She didn't whine. She didn't paw. She simply rested her chin beside the picture and, very carefully, nudged the toy so its cracked hood touched the edge of the image. "Tomorrow," Emily whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was promising, herself, the dog, the boy in Ohio. "We'll try for tomorrow." Outside, wind moved through the leaves with a sound like pages turning. Somewhere down Linden Street, a school bell rang for a class that had long been dismissed. The shepherd closed her eyes, and for the first time since Emily had met her, her face looked peaceful, not because the story was over, but because it had finally found its way back to where it could be picked up again. They came on a Thursday, the kind of gray morning that makes every sound carry. Two animal control officers in navy jackets parked by the curb and walked up Emily's front path with clipboards tucked under their arms, their expressions arranged into that careful neutrality bureaucrats wear when they expect to be disliked. Through the screen door they could see the shepherd asleep on the kitchen mat, the broken truck under her chin like a pillow. Sophie was in her high chair, banging a spoon in a rhythm only she understood. The whole house smelled faintly of oatmeal and damp fur. "Miss Hale?" the taller officer asked when Emily stepped onto the porch. He glanced past her, taking inventory. "We got a referral from CPS. There's concern about an unlicensed animal in a home with an infant." "She's not," Emily almost said mine, and then swallowed it, because that was the whole problem. "She's a stray who isn't really a stray. We're trying to find her boy. Child Protective got me in touch with his relatives in Ohio. There's a caseworker." In the middle of it, the shorter officer softened at the edges. We understand. Still, we're required to scan for a chip and verify ownership. If there's no registered owner, protocol says we hold the animal for 72 hours before making next steps. Next steps, Emily repeated, the words dry in her mouth. She knew what those could mean, and the image came too fast. Fluorescent lights, metal cages, the toy truck taken away because it didn't fit in a policy manual. Behind her, Sophie threw her spoon and squealed as it clattered. The shepherd's ears flicked. She rose without hurry and came to stand beside Emily, her shoulder pressed against Emily's knee as if they'd practiced it. "It won't hurt," the taller officer said, bending with the practiced slowness all dog people learn. He ran the wand between the shepherd's shoulder blades, along the spine, over the chest. The scanner remained silent. He tried again, more thoroughly, frowning as if the device had betrayed him. "No chip," he said finally. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Emily replied too quickly. "It's not your fault." Protocol rolled on anyway. Forms appeared like weeds: notice of impoundment, statement of circumstances, temporary care agreement, and each required signatures in 3 places. The officers explained the timelines, the appeal process, her right to petition for custody. They did it kindly, but the word shelter kept appearing like a stubborn knot in the rope they extended. "Please," Emily heard herself say, surprising herself with the plainness of it. "Don't take her today. Give me a chance to do this right." She gestured toward the kitchen, where the dog had returned to her mat and lay watching them, the toy's one goodwill squeaking as it turned under her chin. "She finally sleeps. She hasn't slept like this since before." The shorter officer looked at his partner, then at Sophie, then at the dog. A small decision passed between them that lived in the space where rules meet mercy. "You have 48 hours, she said. "File a petition to be designated her guardian. We'll make a note that the animal poses no immediate risk and is behaving appropriately in a home with a child. But Miss Hale, if the petition isn't filed, we have to follow up." As their truck rumbled away, Emily leaned both palms on the cool wood of the porch rail and breathed the morning until it steadied. 48 hours. Less, really, because the county office closed early on Fridays. She made coffee strong enough to stand up someone twice her size and set to work. Petitions require stories disguised as facts. She wrote in the blank lines like she was testifying for a friend in a language officials understood. She described the dog's condition on first contact. No aggression, no resource guarding, startling at sudden noises but recovering, responding to simple commands spoken with gentleness. She listed veterinary care she'd already provided: flea bath, tick check, a bowl of chicken and rice when plain kibble felt like an insult. She included the caseworker's name and number, the Ohio address newly captured by the agency, the circumstances of Evan Carter's passing that the neighborhood now spoke of in careful verbs. She folded the scalloped photograph into the packet, not as an exhibit but as a prayer, and slid it back out because prayers aren't for government files. Instead, she added a photocopy of the toy's underside with its faint LC, initials that looked like they'd been carved with concentration, and a butter knife. By nap time, she'd hit the legal limits of what she could do alone. So she did what mothers in small towns and people with more heart than leverage do now. She went online. Not with a rant. With a story. She typed slowly, every sentence weighed. "There's a German shepherd in our neighborhood carrying a cracked toy truck. She's been keeping vigil by the places a little boy used to be. Yesterday animal control came. They're doing their job. I'm trying to do mine. If you know the Carters, if you knew Evan, if the name Liam means anything to you, please reach out. And if you have a soft minute, share this so maybe a boy in Ohio knows his dog is okay." She posted a series of photos that made a narrative even without words: the dog sleeping by the back door, the toy tucked under her chin, Sophie offering a palmful of Cheerios and the dog not taking them until she was told she could, the shed floor with the ghost of a blanket imprinted in dust. She added a short video of the shepherd touching the edge of the scalloped photograph with her nose and then shoving the truck until it kissed the paper. She worried, briefly, about what it means to make love public, and then she hit publish because sometimes the only way to keep something from being swallowed is to hold it up where everyone can see. Within an hour the post had slipped its leash. Shares doubled, then doubled again. Comments bloomed like dandelions. I walk past Lyndon every day. I've seen her at the corner, oh my heart. Evan brought his boy to the library story hour. He always sat in the back and sang under his breath. I can host a fundraiser for any vet bills. My sister works at county. Tell her this is the dog with the broken truck. Following from 3 towns over, please update. A local reporter messaged to ask permission to use the photos with credit. She said please and thank you and sent a careful sentence that told the story without exploiting it, because she had learned, in a year of raising Sophie without anyone to take the night shift, that dignity is not a luxury, it's a necessity. That evening, the doorbell rang and the town came in with its shoes squeaking. Mrs. Wilcox brought a Tupperware of chicken casserole and a stack of index cards with phone numbers in ancient blue ink. The teenage barista from the corner cafe dropped off a paper sack that smelled like cinnamon and said, conspiratorially, I put a couple of dog biscuits in there too. The high school art teacher stood on the porch with a hand-lettered sign that read Keeper Stays Home, because it felt wrong to give the dog a new name, but it felt right to call her what she was. A man Emily didn't know but recognized from the mill handed her a folded 20 and then, as if embarrassed, stuck another in the donation jar the cafe kid had set on the railing. By morning, the story had leapt from the glow of phones to the grit of newsprint. A column tucked below the fold read, Shepherd with broken toy guards boy's memory, community rallies. The county clerk circled the piece with a pink highlighter and set it on his supervisor's desk. The supervisor carried it down the hall to the lady with a heart-shaped locket and a calendar of golden retrievers in her office. And when Emily arrived at the courthouse at 9:03 with a diaper bag on one shoulder and a folder on the other, the woman smiled in a way that made the fluorescent lights less cruel. We don't do this every day, she said, flipping through the pages. But we can do this today. She stamped what needed stamping. She explained how a temporary designation becomes a hearing, and how a hearing becomes a decision, and how decisions are technically dry things made of statutes and precedents but are also, in the end, made by people who go home to their own kitchens and see their own dogs sleeping on their own mats. The waiting, though, that part no amount of kindness could compress. It stretched thinly over Saturday and into Sunday, humming under everything. Emily found herself moving more quietly, the way you do when someone is ill in the next room. She let Sophie nap on her chest while the afternoon light turned the dust motes into galaxies. The shepherd paced from the back door to the shed and back again as if walking the steps of a prayer. When the truck's wheel squeaked, it sounded like a clock. On Sunday night, as rain ticked against the gutters, Emily's phone buzzed with a message from the caseworker. We've reached Liam's great-aunt. She saw the post. She showed it to Liam. He knows the dog is safe. He cried, but the good kind. He asked if he could come, if he could see her. We're working on permission. Hold tight. She read the words out loud, because some sentences need air to become real. Sophie clapped without knowing why. The shepherd stopped pacing and lifted her head. If dogs could read, Emily thought, this one would know syllables by scent. Monday dawned like a held breath. The courthouse's old bell stuttered 10 times and then stilled. Emily dressed Sophie in yellow and tied her own hair into a knot that felt brave. She tucked the petition into her bag along with the photographs and the copy of the toy's initials. She left the toy itself where it always went, by the door. Because if there were battles to fight today, she wanted the dog to have the one thing that had always made her feel like the world could be arranged. At the hearing room's threshold, the same animal control officers from Thursday waited. Less stiff now, the taller one with coffee, the shorter one with a new haircut that made her look a little younger, or maybe just less tired. The county attorney glanced at a stack of files and at the sign taped to the back wall, "No food or drink," and at the clock that betrayed every minute. A judge whose glasses always slid down his nose took his seat and let the murmurs settle. On the seat beside Emily, the shepherd leaned into Sophie's legs with a careful weight, as if reminding her of gravity. The toy truck was on the floor between their shoes, its one good wheel gleaming from anxious polish. The judge cleared his throat, and papers rustled like leaves, and time took one step forward. Whether it would bring them home or turn them away, none of them could tell yet. But the room held a sense, a quiet, pulsing thing, that sometimes the system remembers it was built by humans, for humans, and can bend toward mercy without breaking. The decision came on a Tuesday morning, crisp and bright, the kind of day that smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass even though it was still weeks from the first mow. Emily sat at the worn oak table in the courthouse's small hearing room, Sophie on her lap, the shepherd pressed warm and solid against her leg. The judge, spectacles sliding halfway down his nose, shuffled a few papers, cleared his throat, and said the words she had been holding her breath for since Thursday. "Ms. Hale, the court grants you legal guardianship of this animal, effective immediately." It was such a simple sentence for what it carried, weeks of worry condensed into a moment. Emily exhaled without realizing she'd been holding the air so tightly inside her. The shepherd didn't move, but her tail thumped once against Emily's shoe, like she knew the meaning even if she didn't understand the words. Sophie squealed, grabbing for the dog's ear, and Emily laughed through the sting in her eyes. Outside, the sunlight was warm but gentle, and for the first time in days Emily walked without feeling like she had to watch the clock. By the time they got home, the backyard was bathed in gold. Sophie tottered into the grass, still unsteady on her feet, her small hands reaching for dandelions gone to seed. The shepherd followed at her own pace, lowering herself into the soft patch of lawn beside the sandbox, her body folding down with the ease of someone who finally knows they are safe. The toy truck lay in the grass between them. Emily had spent part of the previous night fixing what she could, cleaning away the grime, securing the tape so it lay flat and smooth, rubbing away the faint rust that had bloomed along the axles. The missing wheel could never be replaced, but somehow that felt right. The imperfection was part of the story now. Sophie picked it up, giggling at the squeak of its lone wheel, and placed it gently back between the shepherd's paws. The dog's eyes softened, and she lowered her chin until her nose brushed the toy, as if to say, "Still ours." Through the picket fence, Mrs. Wilcox appeared, her straw sun hat slightly askew, holding a paper bag of something that smelled like cinnamon. She paused at the gate, watching the scene with a smile that was more than just polite. It was the kind of smile that carries memory in it. "Looks like she's found her place," the old woman said. "She has," Emily replied, glancing down at the shepherd. "We all have, I think." They talked for a few minutes about the weather, about Sophie's latest adventures in stacking blocks, about how Mrs. Wilcox still swore her roses bloomed better when she sang to them. But mostly, they stood in the easy quiet that comes when a story has landed where it's meant to. Emily's mind wandered back to the first day she saw the shepherd in the park. The stillness, the broken toy, the way it had all felt like a puzzle with pieces scattered too far apart. Now, here they were, baby, dog, toy, and home all in one frame. The boy who had loved this dog and this toy was far away, but a part of him had come to rest here. And maybe, one day, she thought, they'd bridge that distance. She knelt in the grass beside them, running her hand along the shepherd's back, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. "Some memories can't be replaced," she murmured, "but sometimes they can find a new home." The shepherd blinked slowly, The kind of blink that says "I hear you" and closed her eyes. Sophie leaned against her side, her tiny fingers tracing the taped seam of the truck like it was a treasure map. The sun slid lower, catching on the smooth edge of the tape, making it gleam for a moment like it was something precious and new. Emily sat back and let the warmth sink in, not just the sunlight, but the knowledge that this chapter would hold. The dog was no longer wandering with a broken toy and nowhere to go. She had a yard to rest in, a baby to watch over, and a piece of her past lying safe in the grass beside her. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of clover, and the world felt, just for that moment, exactly as it should be. Some things can't be explained, but they still make us believe. What did this story make you think? Let us know in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more. Until next time, keep your heart open to the unexpected.